Hello, Lynn.
Hello.
Okay, I think we should be good. Do you want me to mute everybody, Leslie, so you can?
Yeah, others can join as they come in, I guess.
Yeah, of course. Okay, I'll mute everybody and then you and Jeff will have to unmute.
Right. Okay then, welcome everybody. I'm afraid I'm standing in for Roger tonight because, as usual, he isn't able to speak to us and show his face at the same time. I think it's because of his Wi-Fi signal. But anyway, I'd like to introduce Jeff Clarke, who is an experienced ecologist with a passion for the natural world and who loves to share his knowledge with others. He's an associate tutor for the FSC, which of course we all know is the guarantee of sustainably sourced timber. But until I looked up the abbreviation yesterday, I didn't know that the initials stood for the Forest Stewardship Council. Jeff also leads wildlife holidays independently and also for other organisations. Tonight's talk will show a wildlife photographer's journey through the Picos de Europa in Spain, contrasting with the cetaceans and other wildlife found in the vast Bay of Biscay. So I will now hand over to Jeff, and I hope we can all have a really good evening. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you very much indeed. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be with you, if only by these surreal means. And so I wouldn't normally get down to your areas. It gives me an opportunity to say hello and maybe introduce myself, hopefully do a few talks for you in the future as well. But this particular talk that we're going to do this evening came from a journey with fellow photographers and wildlife nuts. We'd heard about the amazing wildlife of a place called Picos de Europa. I'm sure some of you have been to the Picos de Europa. I'm so sure some of you have got there by crossing a big area of water known as the Bay of Biscay. And you may have mixed feelings.
I'm having great echoing coming through.
Can you hear that now? Is that better? Is that better? Okay, so as some of you will have known, you've crossed the Bay of Biscay yourselves. It can be a notorious place. So we're going to crack on with the actual programme itself. And we'll go to, so hopefully in a second or so, can you all see that coming up? Give me a thumbs up if you can. Good. Okay, so this particular journey was conducted with some of my fellow naturalists. We took off from Portsmouth, the famous Victory, as some of you will know about. And it's a super location to go from. And as you travel out from Portsmouth, you head out into past the various things that you can see on your screens here. I'm just going to, one second, we've got a little issue going on here. It's decided to run it, the whole thing. You just love technology, don't you? Right, so as I say, you're coming out of Portsmouth, you go past these towers, Palmerston's Towers, and as you're coming out into the bays of the channel, you may be lucky enough to see some dolphins, but more likely porpoises if the conditions are calm. And you're going to be going on this ship. It's the Pride of Bilbao. Has anybody gone on the Pride of Bilbao? I'm sure some of you went on the Pride of Bilbao. The three of us here, we went on the Pride of Bilbao because it was the best way to get from A to B in terms of going from Portsmouth to I'm sorry, folks, this is doing something it's never done before. It's just going on and on. So if you just watch what happens here now, as we're traveling through, you're going down the channel, you're heading out towards the outer reaches, and you start to see different types of whales and dolphins as you're going. And as you're coming towards the shelf break, you get a greater variety of whales and dolphins, and you get some of the big whales and dolphins appearing. As you're going over the lip and into the big areas, you may get sperm whale and Cuvier's beaked whale. And by the time you get to the far side, you've reached, hopefully, Spain. And in Spain, you get a great variety of species, as you know. But we're going to go... Just give me 1 second, folks. We're going to stop this for a second because I've got a problem with the laptop. I'm just going to stop it. I do apologise. I'm just going to have to stop this for a second. I'm just going to have to go into the programme. Just give me a moment.
The chat button isn't on at all, Leslie. And I'm still getting terrific echoing. If I don't get rid of it, I'll have to come out. I can't hear you, Leslie.
Yeah, I've got the chat. I've got the chat button.
Yeah, it says chat disabled on my
Oh, does it?
Yeah, it does actually.
Leslie, we can hear you and other participants, but we can't hear the speaker very well. So I think he needs to do something to improve the sound, because I can hear everybody else coming through the computer, but I can't hear him coming very well at all. We've got it up to maximum sound. We still can't hear what he's saying most of the time.
Yeah, well, I've got my earphone in, which is making all the difference, I have to say.
Well, we're sitting in front of the TV.
To see if I can hear him without the echo.
We also have very poor sound quality with an echo. Not on mute.
Is that something you've had before, Jeff, with the sound?
It happened on the last one, and I've got a different system again. But what I'm going to do now is, can you all hear me at the moment?
Not very well.
Right, I'm going to try this out. Just give me 1 second. Is that better, folks, or worse?
Better. The same.
I don't know what's causing it, because I've been into the system and tried to sort it all out, and I can't seem to change it so it sounds any different. If I'm back here, does it sound any better if I'm further away from the microphone?
Sounds all right to me.
Is that better?
No.
It sounds all right at the moment.
Okay, let me
improvement, I think.
If the sound's a problem, we'll have to try and find another way around it. Just give me 1 second. So I'm going to share screen with you again. So we got to the side in terms of dolphins, but some of you hopefully will remember that if you've ever been on the Pride of Bilbao, then the Pride of Bilbao had a display board that showed you the different whales and dolphins that you could possibly see as you cross the Bay of Biscay, and there are many species. If you look very carefully, you will see that there are some yellow lines on the floor that looks like double yellow lines. Those lines were down to show you the measurements of the different whales and dolphins. There's one there about 7 feet long, which is for a common dolphin. And then there was another great big long line, and it was something like 89 feet long, and that was a fin whale. Unfortunately, nobody ever told us that if you stepped on those yellow lines when it was wet, they were incredibly slippery. And on one occasion, one of my companions, she stepped on the yellow line. She flipped up into the air. She did a double toe loop and a triple salco. She smashed down onto the floor, looked up at me as if to say, you never warned me about that. But she did get 6 marks from those people up in the gallery that were watching her. So that was nice. If only she'd had a bit more style, she might have won. Anyway, by the by, this is where people were mainly based. Some of you will remember that there was a thing called the Biscay Dolphin Research Programme that was operating on the Pride of Bilbao. And the Pride of Bilbao had this team aboard that ran the transit that the Pride of Bilbao went from Portsmouth to Santurce. And they did it religiously, and they got incredibly detailed results of the whales and dolphins that were occurring in the Bay of Biscay. We know an awful lot more thanks to those people. They would give lectures when you were on board. I'm sure some of you would have attended those lectures. It was usually a guy called Clive Martin that would give those lectures, but there's also a lady called Emma Webb, who I work with on a regular basis. In fact, I was only speaking with Emma earlier on today. If you're going to cross the Bay of Biscay or go to the Picos Europa, here's some of the things that you may wish to take with you. One of the better sort of European guides for whale and dolphin watching comes from Mark Carbidine. And then there's the Picos Europa Sunflower Guide. Some of you, I'm sure, have got this. It was written by a lady called Teresa Farino, and Teresa and I teamed up in future years. We ran tours together for a good number of years until she retired pretty much last year. And then on the right-hand side, there's a whales and dolphins book there that you want to take with you if you go to further afield, not just the European waters. As you start to cross the bay, you'll come across all the regular seabirds that most of you are familiar with, fulmars, of course, which are a type of tube nose, and you can probably see the tube nostrils on the top of the fulmar there. I'm sure some of you know this, but some of you may not, but the tube noses find their food through their sense of smell. And so if there's some offal being thrown overboard from the factory ships and things like that, they're harvesting the fish and they're throwing the fish overboard, the bits of scraps. These birds, particularly fulmars, they pick up on that very, very readily. They'll track down upwind and they'll find that food source. And in fact, we do know that the fishing industry was the principal reason that the fulmars started to spread around UK waters, because they were taking advantage of a food source that hadn't previously been available to them. Probably the bird that you see most frequently on the crossing of the Bay of Biscay is going to be the gannet. Now, the gannet is our biggest seabird under most circumstances, unless we get an accidental albatross up from the southern oceans. It's a magnificent bird. It's got a nearly 6-foot wingspan. And one of the advantages of being on these ships as you're crossing the bay is that they're literally flying at eye level with you. And so this bird was taken from the promenade deck of the Pride of Bilbao as we're travelling along. In fact, all the photographs that you see were taken during the actual tour. Obviously, the juveniles do get people a little bit confused, and those first-year birds go through a series of changes. And at this point in time, they look remarkably like one of the rarer shearwaters. And there's a lot of people mistake young gannets for rarer shearwaters, particularly Corey's shearwater, and I'll come to that shortly. Let me just put this into context. That ship, the deck of that ship is 132 feet from the ocean. This little bird is not much bigger than a sparrow. This is the European storm petrel. Spotting one of these is like spotting a gnat at 50 feet in front of you. It's really very small on the ocean. But I quickly learned that the best technique for finding them was not to look off the sides of the ship and hope to spot them, but to look towards the bow of the ship, and you would see them as they were crossing the bow section. That was the most reliable way, because there are quite a lot of them in the western approaches in the northern parts of the Bay of Biscay. And where there are birds like gannets and where there are terns and things like that, you're going to get the birds that are going to take advantage of it. And the great skewer, or the bonksy, as some of you may call it, is the bird that's going to take most advantage of the gannets particularly. And a great skewer here, there were quite a number in the bay as we were crossing, because this is late August. And they were chasing down the gannets, and what they would do as the gannet was flying along, they would grab the tip of the wing of the gannet and they would flip it over onto its back. And it would only have to take 2 or 3 efforts at this, and the gannet would give up and it would disgorge the fish that it was carrying. Of course, the great skewer would go down and it would grab the fish. Kittiwakes are only common, as I found, in the northern part of the bay, certainly in the August-September period. So northern part of the bay and also the western approaches, we were seeing plenty of kittiwakes. But later on, when we got down into the bay itself, towards the September time, we were actually seeing not kittiwakes, but we were seeing other birds, other types of seabird. And sorry, was somebody trying to say something then? No, okay, sorry. And one of the birds that you're seeing as you're going further down is Corey's shearwater. And I think as you look at this bird, you can probably realise how easy it is to mistake a young gannet for a Corby shearwater. In the conditions that you see here, these very placid conditions, they've got a rather lazy wing beat, but as soon as the wind picks up, they do what it says on the tin. They shear and they pile up over the waves and tip down into the trough, and then up over the next big wave and down into the next trough. They're a slower, more relaxed bird than the Manx shearwater in terms of the way that they fly, because they're about a third bigger, if not more so. Now, Danny Pegg was one of my companions on this particular trip, and Danny had the biggest lens. And at the time, I was only carrying a little zoom lens with me, and Danny's big lens was attracting a lot of attention. And I have to say that initially, I had what I would describe as lens envy. Any photographers will know about lens envy. And then I realised that by carrying a big lens, you attracted a lot of attention. So poor old Dan would have to field all kinds of questions from all kinds of passengers going, oh, that's a big lens. Oh, how far can you see with that? And all this kind of stuff. And meanwhile, myself, Brian and myself will be taking photographs of all kinds of birds going, you stay there, Dan, you keep explaining about your big lens. We're taking all these fancy photographs. Thank you very much. So it turns out that having the biggest lens isn't always the best thing. I have to say that photographing the whales and dolphins on that first trip was quite problematic in the sense we were just getting a feel for it, really. I hadn't done the Bay of Biscay prior to that, but we certainly found out that things like the common dolphins were in big numbers, just as you get to the shelf break area in particular. And it was one of the lessons that I learned from this particular trip, is that the ocean isn't any way equal as you're travelling over it. If you're looking at going on a ship, some of you may have gone on cruises, one of the things that you need to be doing is looking at the ocean floor. Shallow areas are fine. There's often lots of birds and sometimes dolphins and things associated, but the big deep basins, ocean basins 4 kilometres deep and more, there's not much there. They're like blue deserts. Nothing much is happening. But where the really interesting areas are on the drop-off zones and where you've got mountain ranges and things underneath. That creates a lot of turmoil in the water, creates feeding opportunities. So if you ever think about going on a boat, look at the route it goes from. Go onto Google Earth, because you can see the ocean floor on Google Earth. If it's uninteresting, almost like somebody's rumpled a sheet for you, that's the sort of place you want to be. And of course, the Bay of Biscay's got these fantastic drop-off zones where lots of dolphins and whales occur. And we'd be seeing literally hundreds of short-beaked common dolphins as we were crossing these waters, sometimes called saddleback dolphins, and you might just be able to see that saddle effect there, or also crisscross dolphin. The biggest thing that we were seeing on this particular trip was fin whale. Fin whales can get to 89 feet in length. They're the second largest cetacean in the ocean. The Bay of Biscay is an interesting place because it hosts small numbers of fin whales pretty much all of the time, but sometimes, most summers, late summers and early autumns, you get an influx of these fin whales into the bay, and they're coming after the anchovies. There can be sometimes hundreds of fin whales in Biscay. And on those occasions, it's just an amazing crossing. As you can see here, the blow on this animal, as you can see at the front end, is a tall column. And that's typical of what we call the rorqual whales or the baleen whales. And these have got the throat pleats. And in this case, this particular whale will be lunging and catching large numbers of anchovies in a single go. If you read the guidebooks on how to identify a fin whale, it may mention the sloping fin at the back, and you can just see the tip of it there. It may mention the blowhole at the front with a splash guard, but one thing it will tell you is that on a fin whale, you don't see the blowhole and the fin at the same time. And you can see quite clearly on this particular whale, I could see the blowhole and the fin at the same time. That's because generally, as the animal rolls over, the blowhole disappears before the fin, because the dorsal fin becomes obvious. So you can sometimes see that, but the slope of that dorsal fin tells you that this is a fin whale. Now, I think one or two of you were on some of the very last trips that the Pride of Bilbao ever made across the Bay of Biscay. And I think I took this particular photograph on one of these later trips. It wasn't on this one that I was on with Danny and Ian and Brian. And as you're looking at this image here, one of the things that I noticed, and this we're now talking over a decade ago, aren't we, that the Pride of Bilbao finished. I had noticed that normally on the trips crossing the Bay of Biscay, on the Pride of Bilbao, there might be 100 bird watchers. And most of them were British. Most of them were men with grey hair. They were definitely 45 plus as an average. What was very interesting for me on those last few trips on the Pride of Bilbao was how that was changing. And on the last trip I did, there were over 300 bird watchers and whale watchers on that trip. And when I looked around, about half of those people were under 30. But what I found concerning was of all of those younger people that were on that particular vessel, looking at the whales and dolphins, looking at the birds, all of those young people, bar a handful, were either French or Spanish, not British. Where were the young Brits? It was a bunch of old Brits, no young Brits. And so I thought that's really interesting. I do wonder whether that has continued, whether we have not got that many youngsters coming through, taking advantage of the natural environment in the way that our Spanish and French compatriots have, and whether we're seeing a change in the way that the demographics, if you like, of European bird watchers is changing. Some of you know that the sunsets on the Bay of Biscay can be amazing. Has anybody heard of the green flash? Some of you have heard of the green flash, yes. So the green flash isn't the trainer that you used to wear when you were playing tennis, made by Dunlop. It is in fact this moment when the sun just finally dips below the horizon. As it touches and drops below, you get a change in the colour of the sun at the last second to green. It's called the green flash. And you can possibly just see that last little bit of sun dropping below the horizon there is actually greenish rather than yellow. And you get this momentary sort of green flash. It's very difficult to see, and you basically use up a lot of camera power just taking lots and lots of photographs. So that was the first sort of trip across the bay. We've got to go back later on. But you get to the Picos de Europa. I don't know how many of you have ever been to the Picos de Europa, but where you are, your county is roughly 10 times larger than the Picos de Europa. That kind of puts it in perspective, but it's a very mountainous area. So obviously there's quite a lot of land because it's corrugated. And my very first introduction to the area was a place called Hamida Gorge. You come off the main highway running along the coastal strip from Santurce, where you've embarked the boat, and you come to this area, the Rio Diva and the Hamida Gorge, and you get this limestone landscape. Now, rivers aren't particularly common limestone landscapes. They're often actually underground, but here the Hamida Gorge, the Rio Diva, is rushing out. And of course, you've got the usual associated fast-flowing stream birds. And also, there were very large pond skater type animals, which were more river skaters, probably about 10 times bigger than the pond skater you've got in your garden. And they were chasing down things like golden ringed dragonflies and pulling them under the water. So it was pretty fantastic to watch. Now, here's the story. When I first stayed, I wouldn't normally show you the hotel that I stay in, but for this particular trip, I'd been charged with organising the accommodation. And it was the early days of the real, promise of the internet. Now, the year before, we'd gone to a place called Cape May, and I booked a luxury log cabin for the four of us. But when we got there, it turned out that this luxury log cabin had holes that you could see through the boards. It was 2 degrees at night, and the heating only blew cold. So I wasn't very popular for picking that accommodation. You better do better this time, Jeff. So I booked this place. It's called the Hotel de l'Oso, or the Hotel of the Bear, in a place called Cuscoya. And I looked on the internet because I thought I want to book somewhere good. And the strap line for this hotel was something along the lines of the Hotel Deloso. The owner has 3 unmarried daughters, and I thought, well, that's perfect. So we booked the accommodation. And when you get there, you realise that the 3 unmarried daughters are guarded by very large St. Bernard dogs. So there's, it's perfectly, everything's shipshape and above board. It's a wonderful place, and if you've ever stayed in Biscay at the Hotel Deloso, the food is fantastic. It's a wonderful location right alongside the Rio Diva. I would recommend it. It's a great spot for getting around the Picos Europa, not far from the major town of Potes. And the Rio Diva right there, you looked over the wall and there were dippers. Now, they're not the dippers that you and I are familiar with here in the UK. This is the black-bellied dipper. It's the European form. We have a form that has a sort of chestnut band, as you know. And so it's a slightly different colour form. And there were young birds around. It was actually very difficult to photograph them because it was quite deep in the shade there. So getting any decent photographs was quite complicated. Where I live now, I see dippers pretty much every day on the River Mersey, of all places. But certainly that was one of the great joys of that particular location, just literally walking out of the hotel door, and there were the dippers. This is a youngster, of course. Now, one of the main targets, we had 3 or 4 bird species that we had got particular interest in seeing, and one of them, there was only one way to do it, and you had to go on this cable car. So you went down to a place called Fuente Day, and you got on the cable car. Now, if any of you have got a nervous disposition, look away now, because this is a vertiginous ride. It is the longest single-span cable car in Europe, and it goes incredibly high, right up into the mountain tops. And I've been in that particular cable car when I've seen people crying because of the effect it has on them. And any slight movement would really concern them, but I just found it fantastic. And as the cable car gets up to the very top area, you end up coming in towards the upper cable car station, and you can see it there. And I don't know if you can see this small projection here. That is a small steel slatted walkway that goes out into the drop-off zone, and it's like 4,000 or 5,000 feet straight down from there. It's fantastic. And this is myself and Brian working that particular area, and you can see how clear, you can see straight through that grill looking down. And obviously people would go and use that particular spot quite happily, mostly, but I do remember vividly one young lady going on there with her boyfriend, and the boyfriend suddenly stopped just a little bit short of getting onto there, and she jumps on quite happily, and she's encouraging him to come on. And he was so nervous about it, he ended up getting on his hands and knees and crawling onto the grill because he was so petrified by them. And I understand that, because lots of people do have real vertigo issues and things like that, but for me it wasn't an issue. And what we were photographing there, of all things, was a thing called Alpine accentor. Of course, our hedge accentor is a close relative, and I don't know how many of you know this, but the acentors, as a group, they emanate from the Himalayas, and that's where they're radiated out from. So Alpine accentor likes the high alpine tops, as you know, and of course it was one place that you could see them up on the Picos Europa at the top of Fuente Day's platform. Also there, if any of you have ever been skiing, you'll know about this in Europe, a type of crow, a type of chuff, which is the alpine chuff, and there are lots and lots of alpine chuffs up there. And of course we spent a bit of time attempting to photograph them. This is Brian trying to get photographs of them. And this is a young bird with a rather darkish tip to the bill and rather dull legs. And they would hang in the updraft, and you would get reasonable shots. Although Brian and I think Brian took this particular shot, he'll be really annoyed by that because he's just clipped the tip of the wing off. And photographers hate that kind of thing. What you will see on this particular bird, can you see the rings on the legs? And we noticed there was a long-term study going on in terms of ringing these birds at the station, up at the cable car station. And ringing is as big in Europe as it is here in the UK. So there was a detailed ringing program for these alpine chuffs. Of course, they were second bested by the biggest of the corvids up there. The ravens were up there as well. And at some point, some chap come out of a nearby restaurant and just thrown a huge loaf of bread, which of course it then seconded, and all the other birds were kept away. There was actually, as I mentioned, a restaurant right at the top of the cable car. So one of the first things we did was go and have a beer. Cuatro cervezas, por favor, muchas gracias. Because it was really getting quite warm, and we sat down, we thought, waiting for the big vultures and things to start coming up. And we were sat there watching away and hoping they were going to appear. And the first one to come through was an Egyptian vulture as it came across. And then a little bit later on, the griffins started to come off the nearby cliffs, and you were getting eyeball to eyeball views of the griffins as they came over. But as the heat was starting to build, they were getting higher and higher. And we thought, well, we need to move before they've all left the cliffs, because there was still lots of them up on there waiting to go. We wanted to get into a better position. And we set off, and as you can see here, wherever you've got 3 birders, you've got 7 different opinions as to which way is the best way to go. We would march, and as we were going across this plateau area, we came across this wheatear. When you first look at this wheatear, you may think you're looking at a black-eared wheatear, but it's not. This is a subspecies of our northern wheatear, the one that we get here, but it's one that occurs across southern Spain and up into the northern Spain as well. And so once you go down past Spain into Morocco, there's yet another species called seabones wheatear, or again, it's just a northern wheatear, and the northern wheatear has got all these different populations wherever it is. And of course, we get our wheatear here, but we also get wheatears that breed in Iceland coming through, and then wheatears go to Greenland coming through our region as well. And they're all identifiable if you look carefully. Up there as well, there are lots of water pipits. And I don't know what water pipit populations are like in your particular area, but we get small numbers here in the northwest of England every single year. And they're quite hard to pick out, obviously, but if you go down to sort of freshwater areas rather than maritime areas, rather than going along the coastal strip where the rock pipits are, that's where the water pipits tend to be. They used to like watercress beds and things like that, but where we are, they tend to be on small pools or marshes in our section of the UK. Now, Danny, as I mentioned, do you remember the big lens I was telling you about? Now, he also had a great big sort of Wimberley head with him and a great big tripod. That was an incredibly heavy piece of kit he was carrying around the mountains. And I have to say, it's starting to take its toll on Danny. He got a really bad neck from carrying all that gear up and down those high mountains. They're really quite difficult to work. And put him under a lot of pressure. And you can see this limestone landscape up there. While we were up there, we did actually get a black vulture come over. It's like 2 ironing boards strapped together. I can remember going to a place called the Tenayas Valley many years ago on Mallorca. Somebody may have been down that way, and one of these birds flew over me very close, and there was a German chap just passing me, and I went, "Black vulture," and he was like marching towards the Tenayas, Castle del Rye, and he looked up and went, "Yeah." He didn't even bother. That's it. That was his whole looking at this magnificent bird that was like 10-foot wingspan. And as you can see there, it's like, I say, 2 ironing boards strapped together with these great big fingers. And it's very rare in northern Spain. So we were fortunate to have seen this particular bird. As I say, we were trying to get towards where all those griffin vultures were. I eventually found somewhere where I saw raptors were coming up and managed to get 1 or 2 shots of the kestrels. And then the vultures started to come off the cliffs again. And as they did so, they would give a mighty sort of 1 or 2 big, deep wing beats. Then they'd catch a thermal, and they'd be off. And I don't know if you've ever watched birds in thermals. Somebody was mentioning about buzzards and things a moment or 2 back in your area. When you see them thermaling up, you imagine that they're just riding the air upwards. And yes, they are, but they're actually falling at the same time. But the air is rising more quickly than they are falling, so they go up. But they maintain their momentum by falling through the air which is rising. So that's how they can rise up in these what's called a kettle. As they form groups of birds, it's called a kettle. And that's how they find these thermals and track them upwards. One of the things that you do get as these vultures come past you is every now and again they will go and just give you a sideways glance. And it's amazing how many times they look at you and you get this feeling, you go, have they just seen how alive I am? Are they just testing me? Because they certainly look very, very hopeful at various occasions. But as they catch the thermals, up they would ride, and you get these magnificent views of these birds. And it's just wonderful to be in their domain, really, and to be on a level with them, because so often, if you're bird watching, when these guys have caught them thermals, all you can see is dots high in the sky. Now, this is my mate Ian. Ian is a big chap. There's no getting around it. He's 20 odd stone. So getting around these mountains was quite an effort for him, but he was brilliant at finding us. The rest of us were taking lots of photographs. And he would go and find stuff for us. He'd go, oh, I've got something over here, we've got something over there. And it meant that we were able to get some photographs in just a few days that we may have struggled to get in a couple of weeks had we been on our own. And as I say, we were up there for a whole day taking photographs. We'd gone up for a particular bird and we got it wrong. We missed it completely because the person that gave us the directions sent us off 180 degrees in the wrong direction. So we didn't see it on that occasion. So we thought we'd descend as the day wore on and we'd go and have a look elsewhere. So that's the four of us. I'll just introduce them properly. Danny Pegg on the right, Brian Tollett in the foreground with the sunglasses on, Ian Appleton on your left, and that's me in the middle of the back, having just run round and set the camera on 10-second timer. Does anybody remember the Athena prints? Can you remember Athena prints? Habitat stores, I think, used to have them in. Some of you may remember that. And the landscape there, because it was quite late in the summer, it was very hazy all the time, and it had this kind of landscape effect. I have to tell you what I've not told you so far is that it was the hottest summer they'd ever had. And at the time, it was often getting to 100 degrees every single day. That's incredibly unusual for that part of the northern Spain. It's very normally 10 or 15 degrees cooler than that. A couple of days later, we went to a place called Cacao, wandering around Cacao, and this is a typical town that you see, or village that you see in the Picos de Europa. Can you see how tightly packed these houses are, backing one onto another? And the idea is it sort of keeps the village warm. It sounds daft, but each house kind of backs onto another, and it minimises the heat loss during the winter, because the winters can be quite tough here. And as you can see, there's limestone escarpments and ridges and things all around. And the butterflies are pretty obvious as we were flying. I hadn't realised at this stage how important the Picos de Europa was for butterflies. It's late in the summer, and it's not the best time for them, but we're still getting things like greylings and lots of brimstones that you're familiar with, but also another yellow butterfly, some of you may know from Europe, which is called the Cleopatra. And it's got this orange suffusion. This one's on Viper's bugloss here. One of the few flowers that was abundant when we were there, because I say it was quite late, was autumn crocus. There was vast swathes of this all over the place. And as you can see, the pollen on the anthers here. And if you go into the meadows, you realise that these meadows would be absolutely full of wildflowers a little bit earlier in the season. And the meadows in the lower parts of the mountain ranges were verdant and waiting to be cropped as a hay crop. Now, you'll notice Brian on the right is wearing shorts. I don't recommend wearing shorts necessarily if you're going to be doing that in the Picos de Europa, because it's quite easy to pick up ticks. There are deer, there are lots of cattle, there are all sorts of stuff like that. So if you're going to do that, please make sure you've got a very close friend who can extract the tick from the dark recess it's put itself in at a later date that evening. So yeah, taking photographs and getting up close, the reason we're doing that is because there were things like praying mantises. This one's religiosa, and all kinds of other small creatures in those meadows. There's a difference between those meadows and the meadows higher up. The meadows higher up are very short, and I'll explain why that is in a moment. Near Cacao are these gorge cliffs, and there was lots and lots of vultures there. There were all kinds of other birds there, and there's also the Cacao tunnel. Turned out there was a troll in this tunnel. We managed to get past it, and we were able to photograph inside that tunnel the young crag martins that were using the tunnel for their nest sites. There were lots and lots of crag martins flying by. Very difficult to get photographs of them outside because the heat haze, I'm only a few feet from this bird, but the heat haze was so bad that it was distorting my photographs at a very short range because of the wobbling air. It was incredibly difficult to get any decent photographs. As I mentioned, the higher up you go, the shorter the grass gets, which I guess it makes sense, but that's because when you go to the top of these mountainous regions in Europe, they're grazed. This is where the cattle are during the summer months. They use a thing called transhumance. Some of you may know about this, whereby the cattle are grazing the high tops in the summer. They bring them down in the winter, and they've taken the hay crops and they feed them the hay crops over the winter. Up in that particular area, there's the cattle that's probably the most famous one is the Tudanka cattle. Rather attractive beast with this sort of blackish pelage, but with this sort of whitish muzzle area and rather lovely horns as well. And the sound of cowbells is absolutely characteristic of that locality. What I should tell you about the Picos Europa is that it's like stepping back in time. It's as if you climbed aboard the TARDIS when you got on the Pride of Bilbao. You come to the other side, you end up in the Hamida Gorge, you end up in the Picos Europa, and you've gone back 50 years in the way that the place is farmed. It's an incredible difference, and it does make a huge impact on the biodiversity of the area. Well, you can, apart from anything else, you can see there's masses of flies around these cattle, and where there were flies, you would get the birds. You would get the birds like the water pipits that I mentioned before, and there'd be meadow pipits. There were all kinds of other birds up there as well. Turns out there was also the world's biggest limbo dancer that we discovered when we were up there. And on this particular photograph, I do apologise, it does rather look like I might be swearing because I've just sat on a very sharp rock. In fact, I'm trying to photograph a butterfly. I'll show you the butterfly. It's on one of those thistle leaves. There it is. This is a thing called the cardinal. It's a type of fritillary butterfly. And I was taking it from that particular angle for one very specific reason, not because I wanted to create a really interesting image, which I was quite pleased that I managed. But if you look carefully at this butterfly, look how bad the wings are. The wings are tattered. And so I was trying to throw the wings out of the focus, if you like, and focused on the head, feeding on the thistle head. The place is full of butterflies. I'm going to come back to butterflies a little bit later after the natural break. This is Queen of Spain fritillary that you can see here, lots and lots of different fritillaries. And there was also at the high tops in a place called Puerto San Glorio, there's one of the birds that was one of our targets. It's a bird called the citral finch. And there was a small area of pine plantation at the top there. And we were very fortunate to come across a family group of citral finches. And we managed to get one or two half-decent shots, photographs of the citral finch. It's a bird that I've photographed many times since, but that was my first ever occasion. Also, while we were up there, we came across a pied flycatcher. Now, this pied flycatcher, we worked our way into it post by post by post along this fence line. But I don't think this pied flycatcher had ever seen a human, because it let us get incredibly close to it. I was literally about 4 or 5 feet from it, and it still wasn't bothered. So I doubt it even knew what a human was when we were there. I heard a noise just below me. A red deer, a hind in this case, was moving across the clinker. And the red deer there make our red deer look tidgy, really small. These red deer are really huge in comparison. The males with their antlers absolutely massive compared to our males, and I think it's because the forage is that much richer than the forage that they're eating here in the UK. The other thing that we noticed about them is they're very nervous. when you're watching them grazing, they would drop their heads and graze for a moment or two, and then they would come up and they would be looking around, and then they would drop. And if you look at a red deer here in the UK, they go down, they start browsing away, and they just carry on browsing, and they barely bother to look up. And the reason is that they've lost their fear because they have not got any natural predators left in the UK. So they just end up like hoovers on the landscape. Go to Findhorn Valley and see how they've hoovered the landscape. Whereas in Spain, they're nervous. And the reason that they're nervous is because they still have wolves. And the wolves mean that the vegetation doesn't get battered by the red deer because they keep the red deer moving. And so the landscape is in much better harmony. The ecosystem is in a much better state than our ecosystem because it's got its main predator on these browsers and these grazers. There's Ian, I think he's about to go into the rut, I wasn't quite sure. But you could hear, when we were there, you could just hear the odd deer starting to bellow at that particular time. And as I say, it was an amazing locality. Because it's a landscape of limestone, you get all these gorges and you get lots of holes in the mountains and all kinds of stuff. This is Carres Gorge, which is one of the famous ones, about 11 miles long. And in there were lots of butterflies as we were travelling along. There were things like the Adonis blue butterflies, and there were all kinds of invertebrates, including green bush crickets. There were lizards aplenty, mostly wall lizards like this one, common wall lizard. And there was also a lot of day-flying moths. This one was called Zagania transalpina, which is like a tiny version of a six-spot burnet moth, very, very small. There were all kinds of invertebrates, and this started to make me realise just what an important place it is for invertebrates. And I'll put this in context for you. The Picos Europa is 1/10 the size of Devon. Right? The Picos Europa has 150 plus species of butterfly, and Devon probably has maybe 35 or 40 species, and then the UK as a whole has 60, something like that. So it really shows you the biodiversity of the area. These the sheer cliffs of the gorge there, and what this particular moment was one of those classic moments you sometimes come across in the quieter parts of Europe. We just had a bit of an uncomfortable moment as we come round the bend and found a huge pile of stone and rubble in the middle of the roadway. It had been dumped there by a truck, and after it was the sign to warn us about the big load of stone. So we were checking down the road to make sure that it was clear and we could actually get down, because it was quite a thing to come around that bend and find that big lot of stone. And as we were going through the Carres Gorge, there's one or two small places to stop and look around and take in the landscape. And at that particular time, I say, it was incredibly hot. And we were heading just in the back. There's a place, a mountain called El Capitano, just in the background. We're heading for that gradually. And when we get there, we can actually see the sun shining through the mountain. Can you see that in the picture there? There's a hole in the mountain, and that is the sun shining through the mountain. As we're traveling through, you're noticing lots of these structures. And already some of these are getting converted to almost like playhouses and things like that. But these are the barns that hold the hay that feed the cattle during the winter. Just look at those mushroom-like pot type stilts that they're perched upon. You see that on some British barns where you get them perched on these sort of mushroom-like structures, and that's to keep the rats out from getting into the hay loft. But the ones in the UK are about 2 feet tall. So how big are the rats in the Picos Europa? Because you can fit a tractor underneath that. But it is a sad thing. If you go to the Picos Europa now, you can still find these. But I think they'll be gone in 10 to 15 years because already the farming is changing there. They can't keep the youngsters, they're leaving. And you see the farmers and they're doddering, they're in their 80s and 90s, and you think, how on earth do they keep them going? I mentioned about Dan and his bad neck. Well, we were spending some time there, and he basically, his neck just completely locked up. So he decided he was going to sort of dip out the following day while we were taking photographs. But at this particular stage, he's still going to stay out with us. And we're going to a place called Sotras gradually, getting up the road. This is Brown Argus. And when we get to Sotras, we decide we're going to have a drink, a Coca-Cola or Tres Cerveza, Cuatro Cerveza, por favor. And we get there and we see all these butterflies, and lots of butterflies in this one particular corner of Sotras. It's got a bit of a damp patch, and they're feeding on this damp patch. And we thought, oh, that's interesting. We go over and we start photographing things like this long-tailed blue butterfly. And we're lying down in this damp patch, photographing things like this mallow skipper. And there was also things like dusky skipper and all kinds of other things like this, and pearly heath and one or two others. And we're thinking, what is it that is attracting these butterflies to this particular spot? And we noticed things like safflower skipper and silver spotted skipper. And there was the bush crickets and everything, and it was all concentrated in this one spot. And we're thinking, what is attracting them to this one spot? And then we realised that we were lying down in the dog toilet of Sotras. Dogs had weed and pooed, and it had dried a bit, and we were lying down in it, and we thought, oh my word, so we did go home and get a shower after that. There's the El Capitano. It was only climbed in something like 1913, this particular mountain. And by now, it's over 100 degrees. We're absolutely wilting. And we've only got time to photograph the odd thing like an Italian locust or something like that. And we just decide, that's it, we've had enough. And we head back to base, and there's a swimming pool. And when we get to the swimming pool, it's full of these butterflies. These are purple hair streaks. And we're wondering what is going on, because there's hundreds of purple hair streaks just lying prone in this swimming pool. And so you end up with 4 hairy British blokes swimming around the swimming pool, picking these butterflies up and putting them on the side to dry out so they can fly off. But half of them flew straight back into the water. But yeah, it was so dry and so hot that the butterflies were literally landing in any bit of water to try and get some refreshment. The following day, we get up early and we're going to try and photograph a particular bird. It's the thing called the middle spotted woodpecker, and there's one here. I don't know this, but Brian is down below me and he's photographing this bird. And in fact, he's just about to get some really great photographs of this middle spotted woodpecker when some Egypt makes this noise, which is pishing. And the bird immediately flew up the hill and landed right next to me. I thought, oh, that's great. Unfortunately, it landed dead in the shade, so I couldn't get a decent photograph. And about 2 minutes later, I see Brian coming up over the horizon with a grim look on his face, saying, which person started pishing and pished that bird away from me? So I didn't know he was there, so I had to apologise. Anyway, we decided we're going to go back to try and find the bird that we missed first time out. So it's straight back up the cable car. We left Dan behind. Dan was, as I say, he was in bad shape with his neck, so we decided he wasn't going to do this journey. And we get back up to the top. And this time we turned the right way. We went straight for the place that we were heading for, and we came across these sheep crossing this landscape. And you thought, what on earth are these sheep eating? But they're eating all kinds of little tiny small plants in and amongst the vegetation there. There was also an area where you would get a thing called a snow vole that was wandering around, but we never managed to get any decent photographs of those. And this is the kind of lunar landscape that we're in at this particular moment. And up there, as we're traversing through that location, we come across the southern chamois. And this particular animal is like one of the emblems of the Picos de Europa. And we got reasonable views, but again, it was still very difficult to photograph them because it was so hot. And then we came across this small cave, and this was our destination. We were told to sit by this small cave, and so we did. And as I'm looking at this cave, we're hoping the bird that we're looking for is going to appear. And it did. After a while, it did appear. And it was the wall creeper. Now, at this stage, I'd never seen a wall creeper. So I was highly delighted because it was a bird that I'd actually dreamed about as a child. I'd quite literally dreamed about wall creepers. There's another view of it. I'd actually had a lucid dream whereby I was out bird watching in my dream and saw all these amazing birds. And I thought to myself in the dream, I'm dreaming. I'm actually dreaming. And I bet if I go home, I'll bet there's a wall creeper on the roof of my house. And as this 10-year-old child, I walked home in my dream, and there is a wall creeper on my house. And it stayed on my list for years and years and years until I finally saw a real wall creeper for myself up in the Picos Europa. I've been fortunate to see them many times since, because I run tours there now, but an amazing place. And of course, as we'd left, highly delighted, in a state of real celebration, watching the chamois and things. We had to go and celebrate, so I went back to the restaurant, and we were actually showing people the griffon vultures and the Egyptian vultures and all kinds of other birds, and they were so happy that they'd used our telescopes. They bought us a meal. That was very, very kind of them, wasn't it? So it pays to be nice, I think it does. So that was, we only had a few days, and then it was time to get back on the Pride of Bilbao and go back. And I'm going to show you something of the second return journey, if you like, but this puts it into context for you, how amazing the Bay of Biscay is for whales and dolphins. The trip we made across was that one 29th of August to the 1st of September, and the return trip was that one the 4th to the 7th. And then if you look through the list there, you're seeing so many fin whales, sperm whales, Cuvier's beaked whales, minke whale, pirate, you name it, we were seeing it. And it was a really, truly memorable trip as we left Santurce. We were only an hour out from Santurce, and we were seeing Cuvier's beaked whales. And if you look on this particular shot here, you can see these sort of strange scar marks on the males. The males have got two erupted teeth at the front, and they battle with each other, and they rake these scars over their skin. And as the males get older, they get whiter and whiter with the scars that when they're battling. It's one of the ways you can kind of tell if you're looking at an older male. And as we come back, we're not seeing just Corey shearwaters. We started to see another bird, the great shearwater. Now, at this moment, I'd never seen a great shearwater. I'd stared off UK headlands in Cornwall and Devon and many, many places, and still had never seen a great shearwater. And then suddenly there we were with 1,600 of them behind the ship as we're travelling back. And with them were things like sooty shearwaters, which have come up from Tristan da Cunha. And of course, Corey's shearwater was there as well. And again, the big whales, the thing where as soon as we hit the drop off, we hit the big whales. And we had something like 30 fin whales as we're on that return leg. Incredible views of them. And in fact, one of the best photographs I've ever taken of a fin whale was taken on that return journey. You can even see the pectoral fins stretched out either side as the whale is moving through. And it's not yet blown, it's just about breaking surface, and those great big nostrils are just about to flare, and the spume is about to come out of the nostrils. And that bow wave, sometimes you get dolphins playing in the bow waves of the big whales like that. But I mentioned these great shearwaters. They've bred interest in the Cunha. They've come up the eastern seaboard of the United States, where they molt in around about the May-June time. Then around about end of July, they start to go across the top of the Atlantic, and they're coming through our region in sort of the end of July through to the beginning of September. And the big numbers are in our region in the end of August, beginning of September. I'd say we had hundreds of them out behind the ship, 1,600 at one point. Just an amazing spectacle. And the first time, as I said, so these photographs are by no means the best photographs I've ever taken of great shearwater. It's just that these are genuine from this particular trip. As we were going through, we were getting bottlenose dolphins. And again, the common dolphins started to appear as we got to the northern sector of the bay. Just absolutely stupendous. And we also got a thing called striped dolphin, which some of you will be familiar with from the Mediterranean. Some of you will collect Mediterranean pottery with dolphins on or something like that. And it's this particular dolphin, the striped dolphin, on which that design is based. And I thought I'd take this really fantastic photograph, and then Brian went and beat me, because this is a really good photograph of a striped dolphin. It was taken genuinely on that particular trip as we're coming back. So it was a really fitting thing to sort of end that very short, literally a handful of days in the Picos Europa and across the Bay of Biscay. And it was great. We had a fantastic time. We all got new haircuts, as you can see from the wind, as we were on the Pride of Bilbao. And I'm going to sort of end this half, or 2/3, if you like, and give you a chance to go and have a loo break and get a cup of tea or something like that. And we'll come back and we'll do another few sort of 20, 25 minutes or so, because that was the autumn. I'm going to want to show you what the Picos Europa looks like in spring, because it's very different. It's very floristic and it's a really different looking place. So, folks, I'll see you in about 10 minutes or so.
That's great, Jeff. Thank you very much. We'll have a break now, and yeah, we'll be back. Oh, there we go. Oh, we've got a few more in as well. Yep. Sheila Berry.
Can I ask Debbie how many people we got on board, or Leslie, how many people?
I think Leslie's doing it now.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 24 as far as I can see, unless anybody else is hiding amongst the others.
Excellent.
Is Phil Tunstall there?
I haven't seen him.
Oh, I'll have a word with him then. I thought he was at the last one. What about Graham Stewart?
I don't think he is at the moment.
No.
No,
No.
I haven't seen Graham. No.
I'll give them a nag.
Okay. Join for the
Because
second one.
Phil would have loved the Picos, because he goes to Spain every year, takes his caravan down for a month at a time somewhere in Spain every year.
Crikey,
Well, that'd be
I wouldn't
good.
fancy having a caravan on some of those roads. I think that's pretty hard going.
Not if you're going to find a pile of stones in the middle of the road.
Or
No.
maybe not. No.
He leaves it at a caravan site or a site, then drives out.
All right, okay.
The meadow that you're standing in there, Debbie, reminds me not the Picos, but when Bob and I walked the entire length of the Pyrenees in our youth, and one day we decided to play hooky and not go up a glacier with ice axes which had got lost at Toulouse, and we spent the day sunbathing in a meadow full of flowers like that. And when we got back to camp, people had fallen off the glaciers, were injured and all sorts of things. And we'd had a really, really lovely day, and it was a really good decision not to do it. And that's just what it puts me in mind of. But it looks a bit cold where you are there, Debbie, on that photograph.
I think you made a great decision not to go up the glacier. I'm very glad that you did that. Otherwise, we probably never got to know you by the sound of it.
Well, we bought ice axes specifically to do the glacier work. It's not, you don't go for miles. It's only a day trip. So it's nothing sort of madly dangerous other than you can fall off the glacier, which somebody did, and she hurt herself quite badly. But our ice axe, they wouldn't let us take our ice axes in the plane. So we had to put them on in the hold, despite the fact that the travel company had said we could take them. And when we got to Toulouse airport, we were there and our ice axes weren't. And they didn't arrive till a week later, by which time we walked a week in the Pyrenees. We did 2 weeks out. And then we went back to Toulouse on the train, and then we walked 2 weeks out in the other direction. Or without ice axes. So if anybody wants any ice axes, we've got a pair.
They're not ice axes, they're walking axes.
They're walking axes, yeah.
Well, David took that picture, Jean, on Salisbury Plain. We went down there quite a lot last summer to see the bustards and the flowers and everything. And that was one of the sort of wildflower meadows. And it was absolutely spectacular.
Yeah.
It was. We went with Dave and Nancy Massey, actually, and Nancy took a picture, which she won a very good camera competition with. And she called it, what was it? Wildflower Tapestry was the title of the photo. And that's just what it was. It was a tapestry of all sorts of different wildflowers, including a lot of poppies of different species.
Well, certainly in the Pyrenees, the wildflowers, well, I'm only short, Mudge, I'm only 5 foot, but the flowers were sort of waist high, and it was just a sea of colour, and it was absolutely spectacular. So that's just what it puts me in mind of.
Great stuff.
Hmm.
We've been to the Picos, Bob.
No.
No, we haven't.
No, we were thinking of going there.
Yeah, we were thinking of doing the Picos, and we haven't got round to it yet. We did Extremadura, to Monfragüe, where you see a lot of the raptors. Literally, I could lie back in the passenger seat of the car. We've got a glass roof on the Discovery, and you could lay there, if you like, seat flat, with the binoculars up, and just look at all the raptors flying over the top. You know, the vultures, Egyptian vultures, griffon vultures. What else did we see? Black vultures, all sorts. It was just, and of course there are thousands, well, hundreds. Just magnificent.
Did you see the Imperial Eagles at Penafalcon? Did you see that? Or theatre?
See that, Bob?
No, we missed the Imperial Eagle. What was the other one you said? What falcon?
Well, there's theatre, and then there's Penafalcon. There are two sort of big massifs either end of the drive through the Monfragüe, and there's Imperial Eagles close to both of those. And then if you go to where the bridge is in the middle that crosses over the river, very close to there, there's Benelli's eagle breeding site. Like very close.
Yeah, we didn't see the Imperial Eagle.
Yeah. I was lucky on one of the trips I did there. We actually had Imperial Eagles attacking a golden eagle. It was quite spectacular.
Mm.
Yeah.
The trip that you did, was that an organised bird trip, or did you organise it yourself?
No, that first one was very much four guys going, oh, what should we do? Going on the internet and just booking our accommodation and hiring cars. And we were using Teresa's book to sort of work our way around the Picos Europa, but we only had a few days. So we kind of concentrated on the Fuente de Puertas de San Glorio, one or two other localities, because we just did not have time. It's, you know, it's not big as an area it goes, but it's just too big to do intensively in just a few days and take photographs. You can't do it.
How long did it take you to drive from either Bilbao or Santander to the Picos?
Yeah, it's about 3 or 4 hours driving.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, the only stress is getting back to the ship, because the ship leaves fairly early on the day that it departs. So you've got to make sure you're back at the ship ready for its departure.
And you've got to find your way around Bilbao. We've done that.
Yeah,
with the sat nav, thank God.
Really confusing. Three of us got fined on one return trip because apparently we'd exceeded the speed limit. We didn't. We had hire cars that said we were hire cars, and 3 out of 4 of us got tickets. The other car was doing exactly the same speed but didn't get a ticket. So, yeah, but you can't fight it, can you? You know, sort of circumstances. You know, so. Because we were actually, you know, using the sat navs for the speed limits and things as well. So, but yeah, it's not too bad. It's really good. I mean, if you've done this, if you ever did the Portsmouth Bilbao route, you go to Santurce, whereas now you go to Santander.
Yeah.
Which is good. There's some great bird watching near Santander, but the ideal thing about Santurce was a nice big hill at the back of Santurce you could climb up. It was great for wildlife. So even if you only did the boat trip there and back, you had a few hours to go and have a play around Santurce's hills and see all kinds of wildlife.
Yeah. We've done Santander and Bilbao, haven't we?
Yeah, we went.
Yeah.
We went over the top of the mountains in snow, driving down to. Where were we going? Down to Calpe on the Mediterranean.
Down to Moreira.
Yeah, so we came out of Bilbao, Santander, went over the top of the mountains behind there, onto the central plain, then down to the Med.
Yeah,
and that was in snow. They were stopping most of the traffic, but we were in a 4x4, so they allowed us through.
The Cantabrian Mountains, those mountains can get incredibly heavy snowfall in some winters. And that can last through toward the end of May. You know, I've been there in May, and it's been snowing quite heavily to the point where it drove things like I'm trying to think what I was talking about then. Yeah, the thrush. You know, which thrush is it? Rock thrush. had driven rock thrushes
Oh, yeah.
down from the high tops into the valleys because there was that much snow in the high tops.
Yeah.
So it just shows you the, even though it's Spain,
Yeah, it gets
Yeah,
snowy.
We came back through snow, didn't we, in southern Spain
Yeah,
on the way back, and the Spaniards thought it was wonderful going up with sledges on just their local slopes and having all this snow to come down. They thought it was wonderful.
yeah. I
We
mean,
didn't
I've,
like it much because we had to drive through it, but it was okay.
I mean, you'll see it shortly, but I've been up many times. I've run tours there over a number of years with Teresa Farino. And when we did the spring ones, when we did the sort of May trips, we weren't always certain we could get into the high mountain tops because some years the snowfall would be that heavy and late that we were quite limited about what we could do. We could get up to the cable car, but then you couldn't get very far because the snow was so deep, or there'd be avalanches going off, you know, all kinds of stuff. So just getting the timing right, you could be perfect one year and then you'd be 4 or 5 days out the next year, you know, but you do have quite a narrow window to get it perfectly right.
Yeah. Mind you, snow is a novelty down here now.
yeah, we've had a bit where we are.
We don't see it that often.
Yes, late today.
Yeah.
Right, shall we start again? If you're ready, Jeff.
Yeah, let's go.
Sit on the settee, comfy seats.
I'll just mute everybody again and you can unmute yourself, Jeff.
Lovely.
Maybe does.
Can you all hear me again, folks? Just going to share the screen. And we'll go from current slide. So this is where we ended at the last point. The ferry had just about gone into the sunset. And now I'm going to show you spring. It's a very different place. Some of you have just been talking about that, and some of you have never been to the Picos de Europa, but I recommend you go soon because it is changing. But spring is just phenomenal. The landscape is glorious. It's very green. As you can see, it's quite a contrast to that dried out landscape that we were looking at back in the autumn period. And you get amazing flora. If you're into botany, it is just an amazing experience. If you're into botany but not 100% certain about what you're looking at, I'd recommend you hire Teresa Farino. She's based in Pedras Luengas, which is right on the edge of the Picos de Europa. She's an amazing botanist, absolutely amazing botanist. She'll tell you that this is digitalis parviflora, and with a carder bee, which I think is moss carder bee on the side of it as well. The one thing you see everywhere, particularly in the valleys and things, is white asphodel. Now, white asphodel is poisonous to the cattle. That's why they don't eat it, which is why it's so abundant. But in between all that, you can see these buttercups. There's all kinds of things growing in there. And it's full of invertebrates of all kinds. And one of the things that struck me was that before I went into the high tops of the Picos de Europa in the springtime, I was going into meadows here in the UK and thinking how quiet they were and wondering if I'd actually lost my sense of hearing because I couldn't hear the bees anymore or the crickets anymore or whatever it was. And then you go to the Picos de Europa and the place is jumping with invertebrates and it is loud with invertebrates. You've got crickets and grasshoppers and it's just, you realise you haven't gone deaf, we've just lost so much of our invertebrate fauna that it's so much quieter than it ever was when I was a child. That moth, by the way, was Burnet companion moth. You do see some terrific invertebrates, and one of the beautiful spiders over there is Micromortus viridens. It's this big green spider that wanders around the grassland meadows. It's a beautiful thing. And probably the thing that the Picos de Europa is famous for, rightly, are the orchids. There are just so many orchids. One trip I did, we had 36 species of orchid in that particular week. And you get it right in the right part of April, May into early June. You can have many, 24 species is not unknown. This is pink butterfly orchid. And of course, you've got these meadows, high meadow. It's absolutely full of things like the early purple orchid or green winged orchid, and just masses and masses and masses of them. But there's also these more peculiar looking things. This is man orchid. You can see why it's called man orchid. It looks just like a little man with a hat on. My favourite is burnt tip or burnt orchid. This one's got a little crab spider on top of it. And every now and again you come across a slight variant with this white tip instead of a burnt tip. And the meadows are just glorious. One thing you shouldn't do, which I got wrong when I first went there, and Teresa put me right, is if you go in a small group of you, don't follow in each other's footsteps, but take your own route through the meadows if you've got permission to go through the meadows, because it will spring back. But if several of you trample on the same spot, it won't spring back. So then they can't take the crop. So some meadows you can go in, some you can't. Be careful. This is the spectacular lizard orchid, which does grow in the UK, but is incredibly rare here. And then there's lady orchid. There's just orchid after orchid species. This is black vanilla orchid, Noxessens. So many species. And I mentioned the butterflies. Butterflies are quite prone to landing on you, I noticed, in Spain in comparison to the UK, because they like to lick the salts off your skin. So in this case, this is purple shot copper. But the Adonis blues, which you do get in the UK, they're absolutely incredibly iridescent. And that checkerboard edge is one of the characteristic features. But it's not just stuff that we have. There's lots of stuff we don't have. Things we used to have black veined white butterflies as a common species in some parts of the UK 50, 60 years ago, but they disappeared. But they're still abundant in the Picos Europa, stunning thing. And we've got marsh fritillary and Glanville fritillaries and all kinds of different fritillaries. That's Queen of Spain again, you saw one of those earlier. And there's lots and lots of ringlets, and you will pull your hair out with the ringlets trying to identify them. There's lots of different species. This one happens to be a really rare endemic one to that area called Chapman's ringlets, but there is many species of ringlet butterfly in that particular locality. And there's Iberian scarce swallowtail, which you know is Iberian because the yellow on the wing is just on the leading edge. That's how you know it's Iberian scarce swallowtail. I photographed this particular scarce swallowtail on this particular bit of plant on a particular bit of track. And every year that I went back, I would photograph another scarce swallowtail in exactly the same spot. It was obviously perfect for scarce swallowtails, even though it was a different generation each year. Probably the most spectacular butterfly that you do see in the Picos Europa and in adjacent areas is the Apollo. They're absolutely stunning looking things. I was lucky enough one day to be up on the peak emergence day, and it was like being engulfed in Apollo butterflies. It was truly amazing experience. And so it's one of the glories. It's the biodiversity, the quantity of the area. It's just fantastic, phenomenal. And we're all familiar with hummingbird hawk moth, I think, now in the UK, particularly as the climate gets warmer. But they're really very abundant there, but they're by no means the only day-flying moth that you see regularly. And in some parts, if you get the timing right and you go and have a look at the poplar trees, you can find emerging lunar hornet moths, as you can see here. And there are masses of burnets, different types of burnet moth. This one is one called Hilaris, Zygania hilaris, and this one is Zygania rhadamanthus. And they're just absolutely stunning looking things. They're like variants on a theme, and they're all giving the same message. Don't eat me, I'm poisonous, I contain hydrogen cyanide, and I might see you off. There's also these fantastic looking things called owl flies. This is Cacardius, sulphur owl fly, as it's sometimes referred to. There's several different species in that particular area, and they zoom around, and they're like a cross between a dragonfly and a butterfly is probably the best way I can describe it, and they do confuse people when you see them. There are some wetland areas, some natural and some artificial, and they're always worth investigation. This one's above a place called Sanavastri. You find things like white-clawed crayfish and lots and lots of amphibians. This one happens to be midwife toad. The next one that you see won't be quite so fortunate as that. But there's lots of these water troughs as well, because the cattle obviously drink the water within the villages, and the water troughs are always worth a look. And if you have a delve into a water trough, you may be in enough luck to pull out something like a marbled newt. There's a rather more marbled newt for you to look at there. They're spectacular, about the same size as our great crested newt, a really gorgeous thing. Palmate newts are common there, just as they are in parts of the UK as well. There are several other different species, including alpine newts. And where you saw earlier, you saw the chamois drinking from the pool. There were lots of alpine newts in that particular pool. I say it's a much more verdant landscape in the springtime. You can see the growth in the valley bottoms there. The whole place just looks completely different to how it looks in the spring. And if you go to some of the outer edges of the Picos Europa, you start to see Spanish ibex now, which are making a return to the Picos Europa. They had actually died out. The last one in the original population died out when a tree fell on it, unfortunately. But they got reintroduced into parts of Leon next door, and they've returned. So you might find them as you're going through, particularly as you're going out towards the Leon area. I don't know if you know this, daffodils are out here now, but Cantabria and all that area, that is the home of the daffodil. This is where daffodils are thought to have originated and radiated out from. This is one called nobilis, which is one of the wild daffs, like similar to our pseudo-narcissus. And there's also angel's tears, and there's a whole variety of other daffodils that are available. And up in those high tops, you'll find lots of this. Do you remember when cowpats were full of invertebrates? If you look at a cowpat in the UK now, it's just a big smear on the ground because we're ramming our cattle full of antibiotics and all kinds of stuff. And what comes out is just basically sloppy slurry. If you go to the Picos Europa, they don't do that. They don't stuff their cattle full of artificial things. And so when the poo comes out, it ends up being full of invertebrates. And those invertebrates, those beetles, get chased around by other beetles and flies. And this is one of the main predators of those beetles. It's a thing called Emus hirtus, or emus hirtus, if you want to think of it in that way. It's an incredible mauve beetle. Fantastic looking thing. And it's very wasp-like in flight to protect itself from predators. It's just a gorgeous thing. And then there's Purpurocenis budensis, and there's lots of these longhorn beetles. And anywhere you see these big florets of flowers, you'll find longhorn beetles and other things on the tops in the springtime. And on the tops of each of the mountains, there are these types of beetles called Iberodorcadians. These are longhorn beetles, but they're specific to particular mountains. So it's a different species on each little group of mountains. This one is Iberodorcadian albicans. So it's unique wildlife, an incredible variety of stuff. One of the things that you see as you're traveling up in the Picos Europa in the springtime in particular is it'll be really dull and grim in the valleys, and then you climb up in the road, through the roads, you break out through the clouds, and then you're in sunshine in the high tops, and it can be glorious up there and 20 degrees cooler down in the valley because the cloud cover is so dense. But when you get the conditions right, obviously you'll get soaring birds, and of course, just on the edges of the Picos Europa, there are lots of white storks, and if you just cross onto the boundary of the Picos Europa, you'll see places like Stork City, where you can get eye-level views of the white stork. Some of you will have been to locations like this and seen it many times in Spain and other parts of Europe, I'm sure. Amphibians, as I said, are very abundant in that area. There's Iberian water frog, and you go down to the various water bodies and you hear this really loud croaking, like marsh frog. You hear these Iberian water frogs. Next door to the Picos Europa, you get these high plateau tops. It's only a short hop to them, really. It's about a quarter of a day's drive, a couple of hours. You get there, and there's woodlarks, and there's all kinds of other birds. There's also birds like this one. You've got the crested lark, and you've got many other different species as well. You've got the rock buntings. And I came across this on one of the occasions, and I couldn't work out what I was looking at. I don't know if you can work out what that is. That's two smooth snakes, but one is eating the other. The one on the left has grabbed another smooth snake and is actually eating another smooth snake. It was quite a remarkable thing to see. And you've got southern smooth snake there, which is a different species again. And as I say, these mountains are full of all kinds of amphibians, but they're also full of all sorts of reptiles as well. And of course, the mountain tops is where you often get the birds of prey coming through. It'll be stuff like the black kites that you see here, but there are also red kites there. Not as common as well as in parts of the UK, I have to say. Red kites are scarcer there. But it's a great place for seeing honey buzzards. There are lots of nesting honey buzzards in that region of Spain. And booted eagle is one of the commonest things that you're going to see in that particular locality, along with short-toed eagle as well. And again, you get great views in many places of things like the Egyptian vultures as well. And it's my preference is to get up into the high tops so that I'm kind of on the same level as them rather than looking up as tiny dots in the sky. And of course, if you get to the right locations, you get amazing views of those griffon vultures in the spring, because there's a big population, over 400 pairs of griffon vulture in the Picos Europa. There's also rock thrushes, blue rock thrushes, and regular rock thrush up there as well. And if you're really lucky, you come across amazing spectacles like this. This is a grass snake that's grabbed a midwife toad and is consuming it. And you can probably see there's a fly on the eye of the snake there, waiting to mop up the arrears. And if you go into the Picos Europa and you go down to the water bodies and you turn over rocks near the water bodies, you're highly likely to come across this thing called viperine snake, which is quite closely related to grass snake as well. One of the features of the reptiles in that region is the higher up you get in the mountains, the more likely you are to get these black colour morphs. This, would you believe, is common lizard or smooth our lizard. It's viviparous lizard. So this particular lizard doesn't look like common lizard because it's pure black, but this was high up in the tops near Puerto de San Glorio. There are some special range restricted species, including this thing, which is called Schreiber's green lizard, which you see in various parts of the Picos Europa, usually again along watery streams. And then there's this spectacular looking thing called ocellated lizard. This is a youngster, so the spots are more vivid on this. Gorgeous looking thing. What we do when we go to the Picos Europa and to other parts of Europe, we turn the rocks over and we'll find what's underneath. But do you know what we always do? We put the rocks back in exactly the same place that we found them, because that's the home of something. So you don't want to, what I can't stand is going along into the Picos Europa or wherever and seeing somebody scattered the rocks here, there and everywhere, turning stuff over and has not put them back. It's really annoying because it's actually disturbing when you don't need to do so. Usually the commonest thing that we find in the Picos Europa, would you believe, is slowworm. They're very, very common in many parts of the Picos Europa when you're turning stuff over. And the landscape is truly, I think it's the only word is spectacular. It's a gorgeous place. If you've never been to the Picos Europa, highly recommend that you do go. Floristically, it's outstanding. Bird-wise, there's some really interesting birds. It's not like Monfragüe, it's not like Extremadura, but you'll get an amazing variety. But it's the things like the butterflies that really blow your mind. There's so many of them. And if you're into your orchids, there really are very few places that are better. So you've got things like yellow ophrys here. You've got early spider orchid, sawfly ophrys, woodcock ophrys or woodcock orchid if you want. There's a white colour form of the woodcock ophrys. This is fly orchid. And this one is called dull ophrys. And here you can see exactly what its function is, because it's got a solitary bee attempting to mate with it. And this solitary bee gets pollinia attached to it, and then it goes to the next flower and it pollinates it. And it's an amazing dupe. It's like a deceit, and it works brilliantly for the ophrys, and they're very abundant in that part of the world. what I've not told you so far, this is Teresa Farino, and this is her balcony. This is one of the tours that we were doing one time. When we've done the tours, we always run the moth trap on Teresa's balcony in the Picos Europa in Pedras Luengas. Her balcony is the second best place in Europe for moths in terms of abundance of different species. That's how brilliant the Picos Europa is. But that's just Teresa's balcony. When you go out in the wilds, it's even better than that. But absolutely stunning. And you'll see things like, you might see here, things like goat moth. But there's all kinds of different lapis. This is oak lapis. There's cream spot tigers. Passenger, which is a beautiful looking thing. And there's also the giant peacock moth, which is just ginormous. It's almost like, if anybody's got a saucer there with a cup on it, it's the size of the saucer. You can only get 2 of those in your trap. They're huge, gorgeous things. They're related to emperor moths in the same family. And that's the difference. You get the snow on the tops in the springtime. You're never quite sure how big the snow is going to be. Some winters it's very heavy and it can carry on through into May. You're never quite sure if you're going to be able to get into the high tops to see stuff up there. But you have a go. And sometimes it pays off handsomely. And you emerge through that cloud cover onto the high tops. It's just like you could step out onto a pillow. It's just a stunning landscape compared to that autumn one that you saw. I just love it, and getting up there with my camera, seeing what I can find. And those chamois are snowbathing. It's so warm that they've taken to the patches of snow to cool down while they're snowbathing. And the chamois at that time are much hairier, as you can see, because they've still got their winter coats on, southern chamois. And again, there's another example of the alpine chough, but this time with snow in the background. And even in the early spring, you'll get day-flying moths up in the high tops. And this one's called the crowned moth with these amazing antennae. And the antennae of moths, the males, it's critical for them to find the females, because the females send out this scent, a pheromone, and the males track that scent with this sort of delicate antennae and can track females for several miles by doing that. Crown moths are common up there in the spring. You see snowfinches up there. I went several times before I caught the snowfinches, but you do see them quite there in the springtime quite readily. And the alpine accenters, as you saw earlier, are abundant up there. And I've been back many times to see the wall creepers, and I've had much, just incredible experiences with them. I've still never taken them what I would regard as my best photo yet, so I've got another excuse to go back another time, surely. But if you want to see wall creeper, there are very few places I can guarantee you see wall creeper, but go to the top of the Fuente Day, turn left, not right, as you come off from the platform, walk to that about a mile till you get to that little cave, sit there, and eventually the wall creeper will appear in the springtime. That's the best guarantee I can give you, I'm afraid. But all I can say is I hope you've enjoyed this sojourn through the Picos Europa. It's one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. And when you combine it with the Bay of Biscay, it makes for an amazingly wildlife-rich trip. You can go at different times. I would go in the spring. I would go late spring, late May, early June is perfect for the Picos Europa. But if you want to get the cetaceans in the bay, then you might be better going in July or August. Less good for the wildflowers at that particular time in the Picos. So you pays your money and you take your choice. I hope you get to go. Maybe you'll get to go one day with me, you never know. But I hope you've enjoyed that. Thanks, folks. Take care.
Thank you very much, Jeff. That was really good.
Thank you.
Let's have a look. Exit pool 3. I can hear somebody's telly again. Hang on, I've lost everybody now. Where are we?
Some are muted, some are not.
Hang on. Zoom. Here we go. There we are. Now then. View. Gallery. Good. Yeah, that was really good, Jeff. And I've lost my sound. You can't hear me properly, can you?
Yes.
Oh, I can't hear myself, that's all. Hang on. Full screen. That's it. That's better.
Do you think we ought to have our light on behind us so that we're...
So, yeah, I was amazed, especially by those flowers and the meadows and that. And all your little anecdotes. I don't think I'd be happy about lying in a pool of dog pee and that sort of thing. Although I'd be keen to take pictures of butterflies, but that was really good, and it was quite a memory to see the boat again, the Pride of Bilbao. I think it may have had one more trip after we'd used it, but it was just a shame because doesn't the Santander ferry go faster?
It does. It goes a little bit quicker, and it goes. I mean, it's a great journey from Plymouth to Santander. It's still a very good route, but it does tend to go a few knots faster. But it's a good viewing platform, so you've still got plenty of opportunities for good wildlife watching on Pont of N, and the Cap Finisterre I think is also pretty good as well. But the route is it's a problem route because it gets a triangular route, so it goes from Portsmouth to Santander, Santander to Plymouth, Plymouth, Santander, and so. It certainly was doing that, and if it's doing that, then that's really irritating because you can't do a return trip straight away because you end up in the wrong place.
Yeah.
So if that changes, that would make it all the better.
Well, I've really enjoyed tonight, and I hope others have too. It's a very tempting place to go to.
That's an amazing place, yeah.
So perhaps maybe Bob could do a club trip there.
Yeah, you could. It'd be great to do a club trip there. Yeah, there's lots. I would recommend the Hotel de Loso as a group, or you go in the Parador up at the Fuente Day. I would also recommend you hire Teresa for the day, at least one of the days to take you, because she'll take you to some of the special locations that you wouldn't necessarily get to, particularly if you go in the springtime, botany-wise. She'll blow your mind botany-wise, with the orchids and stuff like that. So it just is fantastic. If you go in sort of the end of May, particularly the beginning of June, early July, it's just stunning for butterflies. So, you pay your money, you take your choice as to when you go, and you'll hit different peaks for different things. But it are strong. It's one of the most beautiful places you will go anywhere in Europe.
Perhaps we should go 3 times, different times. Thank you ever so much, Jeff. It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much.
You take care, folks. Thank you.
Very good. Right.